This is a touching story about how figurative convicts broke into a lonely man's house. One of them turned out to be his son. The grandfather, Edward, found a small wolf unable to walk near his home, and when he examined it, he found that it had a leg injury and had collapsed. Apparently, his mother had abandoned him and left him when she found him in this hopeless situation. The grandfather, who used to love and help animals a lot, carried the little wolf in his hands and brought it into his house because he was aware that if he stayed like this, he would die in a short time. The grandfather immediately took the little animal to the veterinarian. When the vet finished examining it, he brought it home, put it near the heater, and he kept taking care of it. The grandpa had been retired for several years, but he could not stay in the city to live there, and so he decided to return to his family home in the village, where he went hunting in the forest and enjoyed nature there, as well as planting fruit trees, and he was keen to take care of his garden full of flowers. The old man lost his wife while he was in the city. As for his only son, he went to the institute to continue his studies there, but he did not return after that, and he did not contact him to check on him. The boy had his own life and had completely forgot about his father, which made the man, Edward, mourn the loss of his son, whom he loved, to being a successful young man in his life. As the months went by, the wolf that the old man kept in his home grew up and became his best friend. The animal loved its owner very much and never left him as he went with him hunting in the woods, and he used to guard the house and hover around it at night in order to protect it and prevent strangers from approaching. The grandfather used to treat the wolf as a domestic animal, as he was allowed to sleep with him on the second floor of the house, and he called it Vitok, and he was keen to get food by buying him meat, milk, and sausage from the village, as well as a place to sleep. He also took him to the garden to help him there. Edward told the villagers that he considered the wolf a member of his family and saw him as a close friend. Vitok had become a great, big, fierce wolf and a frightening wolf, but he didn't harm anyone. He does everything he does and doesn't attack when Edward orders him. Some villagers considered the wolf to be a coward and weak because it was calm all the time, but in fact, it was only following its owner's orders. One day, while Edward was sleeping in his bed at midnight, he heard the sound of feet outside, so he got up and went to find out what was happening. When the grandfather approached the stairs, he heard people talking to each other. Then they went up the stairs and found him waiting for them. He discovered that these people were probably thieves and they wanted to steal items in his house. But he waited, and he didn't call the wolf until he was sure. The three people were in dire straits. Young men in uniform and dirty clothes, and who were panting because apparently they'd been running for a long distance. The old man kept watching these men, and he figured that they had just escaped from prison and wanted to rob his house. The grandfather asked the three men to leave his house immediately, but they refused. Then he stepped back and went to the kitchen to get his rifle from there, and he took out his phone at the same time in order to call the police. But then one of those thieves attacked him. He dropped him to the ground, took his phone, seized his rifle, and left him on the ground. The grandfather tried to get up from his place and call for the wolf, but the thieves gathered around him, handcuffed him, and closed his mouth with tape. They left the old man there, and they began to search for money and collect valuables in the house. When the three men entered the kitchen, Edward found out that one of them was his son. And here was the shock. The man did not understand what his son was doing in this place, as he'd left him studying at the institute for 17 years. He was supposed to be living in the city. The old man was watching what his son was doing and thanking God that his wife was not alive to see what her son was doing, and now he had turned evil. The mother had dreamed of seeing her son as an engineer, but she passed away when he was just 10 years old and left him to his studies. The grandfather lost hope in seeing the arrest of these wicked people, and he kept watching his son with tears in his eyes. But suddenly the wolf appeared. When he saw his owner in that situation, he kept looking at him and looking at these thieves, but he didn't attack because he was waiting for the signal from his owner as usual. As soon as the grandfather moved his head, the wolf attacked the three thieves, dropping them to the ground, and then started biting them in different places on their bodies. Two thieves managed to escape from the wolf and fled from the window with blood dripping from their legs, while the third remained in the wolf's grip. Ironically, that man was the son of Edward. When the old man noticed that the wife was preying on his son and was about to destroy him, he asked the wolf to stop what he was doing. The grandfather picked up the phone, called the police again, and told them what had happened in his house. And then he immediately went to his son to check on him and found that he'd lost a lot of blood. So he began to bandage his wounds to try to stop the bleeding. Edward was holding his son's hand and trying to help him. But on the other hand, he realized that his son was no longer there because he was an evil man who had attacked his house, although he recognized him when he saw him for the first time. When the policemen arrived, they arrested the man and immediately took him to the hospital. They then began a search operation to arrest his friends, which they succeeded in a few hours later. After receiving the necessary treatment, they returned them to the prison from which they'd fled. The grandfather stayed in his house with the loyal wolf, who intervened at the right time and saved him and the house from these evil people. And he later learned that his son had returned to prison with his colleagues and that their prison sentence was doubled. It became clear that this son had not completed his studies at the institute. Instead, he had joined a gang and started dealing drugs and robbing houses, which had made the police arrest him several times, and he had been sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. All this had caused his son's wife to separate from him, and she took her son to live in another city and then married another man and gave birth to children. Edward tried to completely forget his son, but one day, while he was sitting and playing with the child, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened the door, he found a small child. The child asked the grandfather if he was Edward, and when the grandfather answered him, he told him that he was called Victor, and this was his grandson. The grandfather remained silent, and he watched the little boy, realizing that he looked like his son. The little boy told his grandfather that his mother had died after she had become seriously ill and left him to live with her husband. When she was on her deathbed, she asked him to go to his grandfather to live with him. So he came to look for him. The grandfather felt happy when he offered his grandson to live with him. He welcomed him immediately, allocated a small room in the house, and took care of him all the time. The grandfather was amazed at the harmony and understanding that appeared between his grandson and the wolf, Vitok. They clung to each other within a few days, and they became inseparable from each other. The grandfather was able to reunite his family again after he had lost hope earlier, and he is keen to take care of him and enjoy what's left of his life with the wolf and his grandson, Victor.